I just keep hearing from so many people, even people more on my dad's side of things, that feel this tension and they feel this sadness that they have to choose between what feels like their moral values and then their family or their friends. And that's not a fair choice for anybody to have to make.
For those willing to listen, learn, and have eyes to see and ears to hear, this is the Nonpartisan Evangelical, where we're challenging the mindset of right-wing Christianity and encouraging people to have their minds renewed and hearts transformed. Let's have better conversations about the life modeled in the Bible so we can truly tell the world God is not mad at you. This is the Nonpartisan Evangelical Podcast at npepodcast.com.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. Excited to be with you again today on the Nonpartisan Evangelical Podcast. And I tell you, one of the things I like to do is talk to people who are maybe reconstructing some of what they've walked through in the evangelical life that they've led. That's what a lot of you are doing who listen to this podcast on a regular basis. And sometimes we just have to say we're learning as we go. And the other thing I told you is my wife and I both feel like there's something really special in the next generation that's going to fix a lot of the crap we've messed up in the previous two generations. And so my guest today hits both of those target audiences, and her name is Promise Enlow. And she does a lot on social media talking about where we are in evangelicalism today, and comes to us with an intriguing story because of who her parents are. And we'll tell you more about that. But Promise, thanks for being with me today on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on here. I'm excited.
So I guess before we get into your family history, and it may have to be part of it, but is that fair to say you're in a little bit of a reconstructive time, or have been in a reconstructive time of your religious faith?
Definitely. I think I'll keep saying that forever at this point. But I wouldn't have.
Oh, you're in perpetual reconstruction now. Huh?
Perpetually. I hope I always stay in that place. I think when I'm very sure of where I'm at is usually when things start to change again. So yes, definitely in a reconstruction, deconstruction, all of the construction going on.
And I guess let's delve into some of the history. I think what kind of makes your message unique, and I've been watching your stuff on social media, and we'll share some about that, but probably the uniqueness of your story is your parents are sort of well known in the Christian heritage and lineage that I pastored in, and what we would call in our stream of Christendom, perhaps. And some may know Johnny and Elizabeth Enlow. They're very good friends and have been good friends of me and my wife for a long time. But our politics have diverged in different directions. And your dad is known as a prophet in our circles and a very, is it fair to say, strong Trump supporter and a person.
So. Yeah, I definitely think so. Yep, that's very fair to say.
As many of our prophets have become in our stream of Christianity. And so just talk a little bit about that. What has that process been like for you and for your household as I've watched your father go in a direction that was a little bit of a surprise for me politically, and probably a little different direction than I've gone?
Yeah, it was surprising for me too. I think growing up, I don't remember politics being that huge. Church was. My dad was a pastor. My grandfather was a missionary. I've grown up that way. So that part of my whole process has been a whole nother topic outside of the political arena, because politics weren't a big thing. And then I remember getting really into it when I was 17. Thank God I couldn't vote yet, because I was obsessed with Sarah Palin. And I remember the different political rallies that, I'm trying to remember his name with the call. Yes, Lou Engle, and going to all of that and the Life tape. And I got super into it, way more than I've seen my parents get into politics. And then I remember right after those elections leading into Obama running for the first time, my dad just saying different things every now and then that would really spark a more progressive viewpoint for myself. And then when the riots started happening, I believe in Boston, over civil rights issues, I don't remember who it was that had just been murdered, And I remember thinking, this is crazy. People are rioting. This isn't right. And my dad really challenged that thinking in me and explained, actually, this is really normal and necessary what's happening. And he was a huge advocate for the Black Lives Matter movement when it first formed, not the organization, but just that cry for social justice. And so that's
Let me interrupt for 1 second. So we're
Yeah.
talking about around 2008-ish, and
Yeah.
you were right-leaning and your father was pulling you to the left politically.
Yeah, I don't think he's doing that intentionally at all. But I do remember when Obama won, and I remember thinking that, which now this is so cringy to me. I remember thinking, like, this is so upsetting, and going to church that morning. And my dad was like, okay, but if you look at the Black members of our church, they're celebrating and excited. And we actually have to look at that and ask ourselves, what's going on here? What are we missing? And that, I was like, whoa, you're right. And so that kind of sparked a lot of my progressive journey, whether he meant to or not. And so it was, I don't want to say my dad was ever liberal or left leaning, because I don't know that he would say that about himself, but I definitely more so than he was Trump leaning. And then when Trump started running, that's where it changed, and where I had to ask myself a lot of questions, because I saw a split forming.
And today he is one of the leading advocates on our side of Christianity in that
Yes.
Trump is going to be a 2-term president as we're recording this on December 28th, probably still believing that to some degree.
Yes, 100%. I think as of today, still believing that. And I think the majority of my family, I have 3 sisters and a brother, I think they tend to all go more that way, at least more than I do. So it is different being in my situation where I love my family more than anything. My sisters are my best friends. I adore my parents. I don't live in the same city as them, so I miss them all the time. But we have these opposing views that feel very important to each of us, and they feel critical, and they are so opposing that it's been an interesting journey to learn to not let that come between us.
Well, and I think that's where your story is really important, because so many of us are experiencing this in our relationships, in our families, of these political divides, and it feels more and more like you're having to choose one side or the other.
Yeah.
And some folks are losing relationship altogether over that, and that it's happening so publicly in your family.
Yep.
And now you are being pretty public in, I think, saying, I don't agree. I have very strong opinions that are very different than my parents, and doing it publicly, but also trying to say, I'm going to stay in relationship with my family in the middle of it. And is that kind of what your message is that I'm seeing coming out from you?
Unintentionally, yes, that is what's happened. And I'm so happy with that, because I just keep hearing from so many people, even people more on my dad's side of things, that feel this tension, and they feel this sadness that they have to choose between what feels like their moral values and then their family or their friends. And that's not a fair choice for anybody to have to make. And so I decided I wasn't going to make that choice. I was going to keep both. And I've always been very outspoken as an individual. And my dad and I have held the exact same views in the past. And we've both been really outspoken. And I've enjoyed getting on his Facebook and helping reply to comments and stuff. So the only thing that's really changed is that our perspectives have shifted away from each other. And so my outspokenness has always been there. And I didn't want to shut that down just because of family, because they see things differently. And so I've found a way to, as of now, keep both. And I want to keep doing that as long as I can. They'll have to be the ones to be done with me, because I'm not going to be done with them. I love them. We have way too much fun in real life doing normal people stuff outside of this temporary. Trump is not even going to always be alive. So I can't let that, change and challenge my relationships long term.
So talk about what that looks like logistically a little bit, because again, it is so difficult for so many of us. So do you just not talk politics when you're together? And yeah, I guess a little bit. What does that look like when you're in the same room together?
Yeah, so it's different. It involves boundaries first and foremost. I think that it's important that I don't ever put myself in a room with my family when I don't feel like I can handle it. And they respect that. And I think they would do the same we don't really talk about our boundary process together, obviously, but that's my first goal, is that if I don't feel like I'm in a good headspace to be around somebody that requires me to put effort, then I'm not going to. And it's not that they require the effort, it's the differences that require the effort. And then my dad and I try to avoid politics altogether. My mom is really good at being referee and just being like, okay, don't talk about this, like change the subject now. And which is a bummer, because that's what we used to connect on, our current events. And we can't even talk about current events at this point because conspiracy theories come into play. And then it just turns into more than just did you hear about this in the news today? So we've had to move on to finding different things to talk about. And I love my dad. He has shown way more interest in my job than anyone should have to show, so that we have things to talk about. And my sisters, my two younger sisters and I have never talked about politics or anything. So that's easy for us. We just keep talking about skin and boys and life outside of Donald Trump. And then my other sister, Justice, she's a lot more into politics, and more so than I am, honestly. And so she and I, we can actually talk about things and even debate a little bit, and then just go, okay, this is pissing me off, let's switch the subject. And then we do. So it's just a lot of either brutal honesty or just, we're cutting off this conversation, we're moving on to something else. So logistically, that's how it's gone, which is hard, like I said, because that's something we used to bond over more. But I'm learning that if that's what we're bonding over, then we need to find more depth to our relationship anyway. So it's been a good thing to have that happen, in my opinion.
And what was the heart process like in this? I'm assuming there had to be some heart process for you in it to say, I'm hanging in there as hard as it may be.
It's been ongoing. It's definitely a daily choice, I think. Especially I'll see something that they post that maybe just makes me feel like, oh my God, like this is so against everything I believe and think and live for and all of that. And like, this doesn't even feel like my family, what's happening. And so then I have to immediately just switch over and process, okay, but what do I know that is true about my family that I love and adore, and just switch that thinking to more hopeful and positive perspectives. And then I always find myself like, okay, this is such a little thing. And logistically, it's also looked like the other day, my dad posted something that was pretty intense, and I was actually getting tagged in it and had people asking like, hey, is this about you? And it was something about the judgment of the Lord and like somebody being Judas and all this. And I was like, no, like my dad is not gonna tell 60,000 people something. I just texted him last night. So unless something majorly changed. So I called my dad. I said, hey dad, my PR people need to talk to your PR people. AK, you and I need to talk. I was like, people are thinking that you wrote this whole prophetic word about judgment against me. And my dad was like, oh no, not at all. He felt terrible that anybody would even think that, and immediately was like, let me say no, of course not. And then what really meant a lot is he was most concerned with me knowing that it wasn't about me and put in that effort. So I think it's been good for me to just, where in the past I actually probably would have just let that go or stewed over it. I now like just call him and say, hey, this is what's going on, or hey, is this something I should be worried about, or just addressing things when it comes to a personal thing. If I was like, hey, I don't like that you talked about Trump today, that probably wouldn't be helpful.
So would you recommend people face that head on and say, hey, I'm going to love you, I can disagree with you, we can build boundaries? And do you think that would be something you would recommend for others?
Yeah, I think if you want to get closer to your family, if you're trying to create, I know there are some families where things are toxic for other reasons outside of political views. And in that case, stay away from those conversations when it has to do with things like that. But if you are close with your family and you're trying to maintain that, then yeah, absolutely, just address things. And I think and I went to my dad saying, I know you didn't say this about me, like, I know your heart for me. And I think if you keep things like that and you keep that door open, and I was right, it wasn't about me. So I think when we keep our perspective toward each other and remember, like, when they're talking about these things that feel so hurtful and harmful, they're actually not about us. This is their worldview. This is something else. It's not a reflection on their feelings for their friends and family, unless they're a toxic person. And that's a whole nother situation.
It's so hard though. I've had to literally, I don't know if I've unfollowed anybody on social media, but I've paused them or put them where
Yeah.
they don't pop up. Some leaders that I loved and really impacted my life and were very important. And sometimes it does feel like they are, maybe not talking about me personally, that's me thinking, but certainly people like me and who believe like me. And not only are saying they disagree, but are saying we're being led by Satan or influenced or demonic. And those things are really tough.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It definitely feels very personal sometimes. And so I think it's good to check in and be like, hey, this isn't right. It's a good reminder for everyone that it's not. Do you find, are you okay if I ask you a
Absolutely.
question?
Yeah, ask whatever.
Do you find, because you're in more of a place of leadership, you've been a pastor for so many years, in the position that Ash is in, do you find people getting mad at you for your perspective and saying that you're leading people astray and all of that? Because I know in the trolls, which are a lot of times my friends, go on my dad's page and are like, this is insane. And they're like, you're leading people astray, and all the worst thoughts that I have to control within myself. Are you getting that as well?
Are you talking about from other leaders or from social media trolls?
Yeah, both.
Trolls are trolls. And particularly now that I'm getting a lot of followers on TikTok, it seems like false prophet or false teacher is the number one thing I'm told on there. And so I always tell those people, hey, thanks for the views and the comments. Keep them coming. You know? But it's been really hard with other leaders. And I definitely have lost friends. I definitely have had people that used to attend my church that have sent very cruel messages of you're not who you said you were, because they had an imagination of being an evangelical pastor, of who I was and what I believed, and that my agreements believed with theirs. And so we've just seen that transition from where my wife and I have been uncomfortable with the right-wing partisanship of the evangelical church since the Bush administration, the G.W. Bush. But we thought it was benign. But then we begin to see the harm, and it, particularly in the Obama administration, and then, of course, with Trump, then the whole lid blew off of it. And as we started to see that, we started to say, oh, we've got to speak up. And then as we began to speak up, people who had heard me hint at this for many years in my church suddenly were like, oh my gosh, you know, why? I don't know. They feel betrayed by me in some ways, because it has become, you're either on this side or you're evil. So yeah, that's been really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely feels personal, I think, on all sides. I think that's what I've tried to focus on too, is remembering, as much as this hurts me, it probably hurts them equally when they hear this kind of stuff from me. And if we can recognize that in each other, it actually creates an open door, because we're all feeling the same feelings, just about very different things.
It's true. I think it really hit me when I walked outside of my church on a Sunday morning one day and saw one of the folks in my church had a pickup truck, and they had all these bumper stickers all over it, and these Trump bumper stickers. And then there was one on the bumper that said, Huck Fillery. And I thought, oh my gosh, is that what I'm teaching people? Is that what somebody could sit and listen to me preach 3 to 4 Sundays a month and feel like that bumper sticker is okay? Then I've done something wrong. And that's when it really hit me that I've got to speak out. And it took a while for me to get there. But yeah, those are the types of things I'm like, I don't care who you're for. That's not okay. No Christian, nobody who says they're a follower of Christ should have that bumper sticker.
Yep. I know that's been one of the weirdest things, is I've seen some of the craziest behavior come out of some of the most religious people that I've known or witnessed, and that's what's, I think, been the most disheartening, is to see when there's hypocrisy brought in. And that's why I want to be so careful that I'm not ever on that side of things too, because I don't want to judge that in somebody else and then see it coming out in my own actions or my posts or my responses back and all of that.
It's so interesting. And I love having this conversation with you. And again, like, your parents were two of the most encouraging people in our lives. In fact, it makes me a little emotional to think about it. And then your dad was the first person. I never had heard the words QAnon until your dad told me about it.
How can those things both be true.
No. And because he was so important in our lives and had said so many significant things to me, I literally watched 4 hours of YouTube videos about QAnon at your dad's encouragement. And I just remember thinking, like, first I thought, I've got to take a shower. This is so grotesque. I'm so grossed out right now from watching these videos, but also, God, how there was just such a disconnect of how this could be coming from your dad. And we've had some good conversations around it since then, but I don't know. What was that? When did QAnon start to become a factor in your life? And when did you hear that come out?
I wish I never knew about it. What's really funny is I have a very distinct memory growing up of me being obsessed with the idea that Courtney Love killed Kurt Cobain, and also that Marilyn Monroe was killed by the government. I'm not going to say where I stand on those things now, but I was obsessed with those things, those ideas. And I remember my dad laughing and thinking it was so funny. And he would entertain the conversation with me, but he would be like, that's how I learned what a conspiracy theory was, is my dad telling me that's what I was believing. And so when I first heard about QAnon from my dad, I think was probably a year and a half or 2 years after Trump was in office. I think basically right when QAnon became a whispering of anything. And I remember my dad talking something about JFK Jr. maybe still being alive, and me being like, hold on, what are you talking about? And that's what made me think, like, I should look into this. And I also am always on Reddit. And so I started hearing about it more on there. And at first I thought, well, maybe this is something interesting. Let me look. And then I was like, whoa, this is really, I thought it was ridiculous at first. But then my second thought was, this is so dangerous because so many people are going to read this that aren't savvy at research on the internet, that don't understand how 4chan or Reddit or all of that works. And they're just going to fall for this stuff. And people are bored, and there's nothing good coming from Trump right now that they can really point to. So this makes sense. Now there's something here for them to point to, and it's exciting, and it's an exciting story, and they can feel like they're a part of it and not have to do anything, which is how I feel sometimes about abortion, is that abortion is something they can get really passionate about and into and not really have to do anything. And so to me, it just went right along with that. But in my head, I was like, this is a phase. My dad this is not going to be the thing much longer. And then it did become a thing, and it came out more, and I would see it in his posts. And he was wearing a QAnon shirt when I saw him last. So it definitely is something he's very into, and he's public about that. So I'm okay saying that. I think any discreetness he has is because he doesn't want to get kicked offline, because they're censoring that kind of thing right now. But yeah, I did not think that it was going to really become what it became.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about it, one other thing I would say about your dad, when we talk about prophet, is your dad also was the first to tell my wife and I, Trump's going to win, and that God had told him Trump was going to win. And interestingly, and I really hope that I'm honoring your parents as well. And I'll think about that if we edit this afterward. But even said, I don't want that to happen, but I believe God has a purpose for Trump to be president. And
I think he implied that publicly when he first said that.
Yeah. And so I can't tell you how many times I think we picked up the phone and said, okay, he just said he doesn't respect John McCain. Now he's not going to win. Or he just said he's going to grab a woman by their body parts. And your dad would say, no, God told me he's going to win. And so I so respect the gifting of your dad. And so it's just interesting where we've seen a lot of this go. And I keep saying, I see this a lot in the Bible, where our prophets go in this political way. You see this through the time of Jeremiah. And even I think in the time of Jesus, part of what Jesus' concern about the church is that the government and politics and making the country great again was such a big deal that they were missing something. And so I've determined I don't have to say I'm right and everybody else is wrong, but I do have to find a place in my mind to put, like, either I'm crazy or somebody else is at some point.
Yeah, what I've had to remind myself about with my dad is, and I actually even said kind of something like this to him, but I was like, he's changed so much. This is crazy. How did he go from being the one to, like, help me get into a progressive mindset to wearing a MAGA hat. I don't understand what happened. And then I was, like reading some of his posts, and he said something to me on the phone when we were talking about something. I don't remember. It was a pretty light conversation, but I made some comment about something being very different. And he said, I haven't changed at all. I've been nothing but consistent. And I was thinking like, what? And then I really thought about it. And no, I think that is what makes my dad a little bit more different. And this is probably a lot my bias, and I'm okay with that. But what makes him different is the reason why he's one of the last few still clinging to his message when a lot of other people are now daily dropping like flies, I think, from this whole Trump rhetoric, is that he has the most hopeful perspective of any person I've ever known in my life. He taught me that. He's been consistent with that all along. And so when he has hope for something, he puts everything into it. And I've seen a lot of people accusing him of doing this for money and fame and all of that. And not to say I'm sure they're getting funds in something. I can tell you it's not a lot, or else I probably would be speaking out against them. but he's doing this because he genuinely, deeply believes in what he's sharing. And he has hope that there is something dark, that something light is going to come out on top over. And I agree with that.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that part. And that's what I've tried to look at, is the consistency in his hope and the Pollyanna. He talks about the movie Pollyanna, where she plays the glad game and turns everything. And my dad has been so good at that. And I do think that is still there in all of his messages. So for people who have followed him and then found themselves discouraged because of stuff that's coming out lately, the core of who he is, the genuineness is still there. And so you don't have to worry about throwing away everything that you ever learned from him, because there's so many good things.
Yeah. And I know your parents are genuine and would not do something for money. And I think all of that stuff gets overblown a lot with a lot of people. But I agree. I think I can believe that God had a purpose with Trump as president. I think God had a purpose with Saul as king in the Bible. He had a purpose with Herod and the exposing of these things inside of evangelicalism, which I think were deep in our hearts, but maybe weren't quite able to come out and be seen, and started, like we say, during Obama. I think we started to see some of this during the Obama administration. And so I think it's good that our hearts are being laid bare. And even though it's really ugly and messy, I could say, yes, I totally believe those who saw Trump, God putting Trump in, but I just disagree with the purpose that it was because Trump was so good and pure. It actually exposed something. And I think I see that in a lot of what you're doing on social media right now, is you're looking back at the church that you grew up in and starting to say, something's wrong here. Is that kind of a message that you're sharing with people in all of this as well?
Yeah, it's so funny because I wouldn't even call myself a Christian, or I definitely haven't been in a church in a while. And yet I still am very drawn to addressing the evangelical church. Sometimes I'm sure that's just because of the therapy I need. But I think a lot of it just comes from that's where I came from. And I've seen so much of the good. And so it pains me even more to see all of the bad currently. And I think when I talk about the evangelical church, that's like a blanket term I use for the part that needs to go away and be done with, and then leave the good and let that be what's there. Because it is so sad to me that such a beautiful message, everything about Jesus, that I can't think of anything that you wouldn't want illustrated in modern day life from his story. And yet that's all been forgotten, because when you hear evangelicals, immediately I see red, I see Trump, I see this whole world that is not what it's supposed to be about. And that's, I think, what gets me passionate about sharing and being open and honest about my experience with it, and validating other people's experience with it as well.
You remind me of Rachel Held Evans. If you read any of Rachel Held Evans stuff, her line was, I'm like the girlfriend who broke up with the boyfriend, but I can't stop looking at his Facebook page, when she was talking about the evangelical church.
Absolutely me to a T right now, to the point that I'll have people, they just assume, oh, you must be like an evangelical leader or something. I'm like, no, not even a little bit. I don't even want to be considered that. I just am passionate about seeing good come out of things that I grew up holding dear to myself.
So who's responding to your message and I'm looking at one on Facebook now where you're talking about the politicization, if I can say that word,
I
of
can't
the
say it. Only type it.
politicizing, how about that?
Yeah,
Of
there
the
you go.
evangelical world. And I've seen you asking people to share their stories of their journey through evangelicalism. Who's responding and what are you hearing from people as you're sharing?
What's the coolest part about all of this is I am hearing a million different stories. I have different friends now that are still very much in the evangelical world. I have Catholic friends now. I have atheist and pagan friends. I have a lot of people in the LGBT community. It's just so cool to see so many people care about a subject that you would not think you would find these people. And that's what it's supposed to look like. I think that the original church or whatever was supposed to, you're supposed to walk in and be a little bit shocked at who you saw there. So I'm seeing those kinds of messages. I'm seeing a lot of hurt people, a lot of people that are still angry, a lot of confused people. And I'm also getting messages from people, like I said earlier, on my dad's side of whatever you want to call side of the political spectrum, who have really appreciated my posts because their own children have found themselves thinking more like me, and they're enjoying watching how I process that tension, and it's helped them relate to their family better. So I'm just getting to interact with all kinds of people and hear all kinds of different stories, and people sharing stories people have been able to meet now because of this and connect. And I think just not feeling alone in your journey is so important. And if that's all I offer somebody is just a companion, even if I'm just typing away on Facebook, then that's a lot more than I had during some of my journey. And so I want to make sure that other people have access to that.
That's so good. I love that. And when I get somebody who sends me a message and says, I used to go to church, now I'm an atheist, but man, I love listening to your stuff and listening to your Bible studies online or something. I just think, how amazing is that?
Oh, totally.
And it's who Jesus was, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's so good. And I think where I can relate with your story and where I am now, I'm just way less convinced that we hold all truth in the fundamentalist evangelical church. And I'm starting to think that God's okay with me believing that way. How do you feel about that?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I think that if you can't question something, that's worth questioning right there. And I think if whatever your God or your belief system or whatever your idol is in your life, if you can't question it, then that is a problem right there. And I think that God is big enough to, it's very cliche, to handle questions and to handle questioning. And you're not going to hell for wanting to be really sure of where your heart stands on a certain issue. And that can be about anything. I find myself feeling really passionate about certain things. And actually now what I do is the more passionate I feel about it, I'm making myself go ask more questions. Whereas before I would ask myself questions about the stuff that I was like, I'm not sure about this. I wonder, let's research. Now I'm like, I feel really strongly about this issue. I should go research that and make sure that I haven't just fallen down this, tunnel of thinking this way just because I'm passionate about it now. That was a rabbit trail off what you're saying.
I love it though. How painful was that journey for you? And was there mourning in that?
Yeah, it was definitely painful, like ripping off a Band-Aid. I felt nauseous thinking about doing it. I dreaded it. I delayed it for a long time. I tried to act like it wasn't ever going to happen. I tried to act like there wasn't a Band-Aid there to rip. Then I ripped it, stung a little, and now I felt like, why didn't I do that a million years ago? Ever since then. So
I mean, you were involved you were singing with a worship team in a church. You were way in it.
I was in school ministry, and I was leading worship for 3,000 of their students every week. And I was married, and I was like as deep as you can get as far as my commitment to all of those things. I was in it. And finally, it reached a point, I think, when you get so in something that you are not okay with, you have to address it. And I was like, let me ask every single question I've avoided about all of these areas of my life, and let me do it all at once and just really go after it. And But yeah, it was tough. I lost a lot at first, and then anything I've gained back has just been amazing. And anything that I've lost, I've actually realized it's very good. That's not a part of my life anymore. So yeah, it was painful to wait to do that. And then it was really good once I actually let go and let myself go on that journey that I'm still on and going to be on.
It's such a story I hear on such a regular basis. And if people know famous worship leaders in the evangelical church, like Michael Gungor or William
Yeah.
Matthews, some of these guys, we're seeing this fairly regularly where people are coming out even saying, I'm not a Christian anymore. Yeah. So what do you think what does spirituality look like for you? And what do you think relationship with God, heaven, et cetera, was going to look like in the church of the millennial generation?
Oh, that's two very good questions. Not a big deal at all. So for me now, it looks like primarily a place where I've just let go. I know that's not really a great answer. I don't have any spiritual beliefs that I hold tightly at all at this point. Everything is very loose. And I think I've vacillated a few times between, I'm never going to be associated with Christianity, and like the idea of someone even being confused with me and a Christian was like, no, I don't want them to think I'm a Christian. I'm not going to use any words that would make them think I'm a Christian. To I'm going to try meditation every day, and I'm going to get these crystals, and then I'm going to talk to the universe, and I still totally believe in God, but God is just love, and let me make this a more easy. I've definitely gone between those different places, and now I'm at a place where I just don't feel like I need to have identity with any of it. And that's where I've felt the most peace and contentness is I don't have to associate myself with anything, and I'm not afraid to be associated with anything either at this point. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's where I'm at with it, is I've just let go, and I'm good with it, and I'm enjoying hearing other people's stories, and I'm right now currently, as in like probably the last year, I've been in a place where I don't have a lot of questions that have come up, and then once they come up again, then I'll probably go after them again, but I don't feel a time constraint on any of it.
And is there an urge for having a community around faith or spirituality for you, and a church, if you will, of some sort?
I think part of actually what was so painful to me about evangelical culture growing up, which I didn't realize, was that a secret belief I held was that if you aren't a Christian, you can't be a truly loving person. For the last few years, and actually one of the main things that triggered that was I started working for a family 5 years ago that was like the most loving family I've ever known in my life, like genuinely unconditionally loving, and they weren't Christians. And I was like, hold on, what is this? Witchcraft? You're not supposed to be able to love. And so community now to me has looked so different than what I thought it had to look like. And so I actually have better friends and closer relationships and better relationships with family than I've ever had, because we don't have to have those commonalities anymore that I thought we had to have. And I can recognize the goodness and the beauty in them and not have to put a label on it. I actually love, my mom always says that one of her favorite things about God is that he will make the most beautiful sunrises and sunsets in the whole world, and he doesn't feel the need to autograph them or put his name at the bottom and let us know. And so I think that's what I've enjoyed about people, is finding community where I don't have to know like why they are that way and assign it to a certain belief system. I just get to enjoy people. So I have found community, and it just looks way different than I thought. And I think sometimes I've missed a little bit of church, and then I'll go visit a church, and then I'm like, actually, I was a PK for so many years. I really hate these kinds of chairs, and I really hate these same worship songs over and over again. But I think I would feel that way no matter what I believed, because I just grew up going to way too many church meetings.
One thing about COVID for our family is my wife and I both were PKs, preacher's kids, for anybody that doesn't know that term. And so we never knew a Sunday morning in our lives where we got to sleep in or stay in our pajamas. And during COVID, we found, hey, this isn't bad.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Yeah, I don't think I missed that part. And I do think that's what's going to be different moving forward with church is, I think, and this is maybe my hopeful Pollyanna perspective, I think church is going to look more organic. I think it's going to have to, and I think COVID's helped a lot with that. I think that I know we tried to do the whole like seeker friendly thing where we're like, let's be cool and so organized that everyone loves it because you're in and out. And then there's this beautiful program and all of that. So the church went back and forth between those kinds of things as well. And I don't think it's going to have any of that anymore. And it's going to look a lot more just like being there for each other. There's a church in our community here in Atlanta that I love because it's the center of the neighborhood, and we've got a community fridge out there. They host every kind of event. They did a Halloween party. And I was like, oh my God, I wasn't allowed to even celebrate Halloween. How are they hosting a Halloween party? And they changed it. Instead of it saying whatever the name of the church was, it said this church cemetery on their sign for Halloween. So they've become like the hub of the community, and they offer so many things, and they are just mostly a place where the families like to come and hang out together. And I think I would be willing to say maybe 50% of the people that attend that church probably aren't even technically believers. It's a safe place. And I think that's what it's going to have to turn into, is a safe place that offers something to the community.
Let's finish with just you saying, where do you think you're going to go with your social media presence a little bit here? Tell people first where they can find you on social media.
So right now, Facebook seems to be where I'm posting more stuff, I think, because I'm so long-winded. Instagram and Twitter are not safe places for me yet. So you can add me on Facebook, Promise Joy Enlow. And I do have Instagram and I do have Twitter, which you can find through my Facebook is probably the best way. But my Twitter is Promise Joy Enlow. I think everything should be Promise Joy Enlow. So it should be pretty easy. There's not a lot of promises, definitely not a lot of Promise Enlows. But I don't know where we're going from here. So feel free to join the ride. You never know when I'm going to post next. I might delete it tomorrow. You never know.
All right, Promise, great stuff. And I popped up on your TikTok feed the other day, which I was glad to hear from you and glad we connected again.
That's how we reconnected. So also, if you haven't given yourself a TikTok shout out, people should go check out your TikTok. It's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And particularly because they're shadow banning me right now, and I'm starting to get my feelings hurt.
Oh no.
I'm learning all these new things about social media.
I don't even know how to use TikTok yet, so I will be calling you when I get to that phase of my social media life.
Thank you for being public about your journey, and I think you're going to be healing and helping for a lot of people to talk about how to disagree and still be honoring. And I just think it's an amazing thing you're doing right now. So thank you, and thanks for sharing it with us here today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me and for creating conversation like this.
Hey, thanks for watching my video. Don't forget to subscribe or watch one of these videos.